From across time and space and throughout the multiverse, listen as multiple generations of geeks come together to discuss the iconic characters, events, and franchises that make up the very fabric of pop culture as we know it. Let Your Geek Side Show presents Then and Now. Hey guys, this is Kitty.
And this is Sam of House Sideshow.
And we are coming to you from the Sideshow Studios in Southern California. Winter has come and gone. While the sun has set on one of the most wildly popular television shows of the last decade, the bittersweet series finale left many fans looking for more. But in some parts of the franchise, winter is still coming, eventually, right? Game of Thrones is a worldwide phenomenon born of the epic fantasy novel series A Song of Ice and Fire. But with HBO's adaptation finished and the last two books frozen in an indefinite state of being written, where can fans turn for the future of the franchise? And where did this epic saga begin? This is Game of Thrones, Then and Now. Alrighty, so Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
It's weird because in one way, people are like, oh, it's over.
Mm-hmm.
It's over.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really not.
It's not
this
at all.
Franchise has been long before the series, and it will continue long after the television series.
Hopefully really, really, really long after. Like, it's so good. There's so much to it. I know that you're a huge fan of the books. Mm-hmm. You've got all the compendiums actually sitting on this desk right now, which is exciting. As dorky as that is, yes, it's very true. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, you brought the research materials with you, and it also just speaks to the fact that this franchise has enough material that you can have history tomes just straight dedicated to the lineage of the Targaryens and catching up on all those little minute details that we don't get in the books.
I think the coolest part about it too is that you can have the entire list, like lineage of the Targaryens, and it's like you look at it like kind of in a summation. It's like, oh, this looks kind of boring, but then you read the book and it's like there is so much more happening than you could like have even imagined. And then like even with like the World of Ice and Fire, which kind of covers, it's like a geography glossary and also kind of a history book at the same time. It covers every single point of discovered territory, quote, quote, I'm making quote signs, within the lands of Westeros and Essos, and it deep dives into everything about them, well, mostly everything about them. Some places it kind of skims over, which is sort of disappointing, but there's always time for them to go back and revisit those.
Well, I think it's also cute. You said everything that is discovered to that point. I think it's cool and it's smart world building to even say, maybe I don't know. I'm the royal eye, George R.R. Martin. Maybe I don't know everything about this series, but we're discovering it as we go. Yeah. So I think that's really cool. So full disclosure, I've read the first two books, and it's been a while, but I did watch the entire television series, and I played the Telltale game series. But for most people jumping in who probably just know the Titanic pop culture monolith of the HBO series that just wrapped up, let's jump back into the books and where that kind of started for fans.
So it's interesting to think, because I think a lot of people look at the series and they're like, oh, this is just kind of like, this is a recent thing, right? And it's like, it's not. The first book was published in like 1996, and the first book goes all the way up to the point where Ned Stark is killed and Daenerys hatches the three dragons, Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaenys.
I was going to say, before we continue, there will obviously be spoilers.
Yes. Spoilers abound.
Yes, and we will be going up through the season finale, I'm sure. Even if you haven't watched it, I'm sure you've heard, because the internet is a glorious place where you can hear many opinions for free. So we will be covering that. But yes, so 1996.
Yeah, and
I wasn't even reading then.
Yeah, it's I think it's a little after, because George R.R. Martin, the thing that people kind of tie to him is he worked on a screenplay for, this is Once Upon a Time, this is a little off topic, he worked on a live action Beauty and the Beast sitcom show, which if you look it up now, it has aged horrifically.
Oh, fun.
Like, he worked on that, and then a little after that, his first book was, or not first book, but Game of Thrones was published. It's not his first book. He's had poetry collections, short stories and such. But yes, Game of Thrones came out in 96. And then the second book, which was A Clash of Kings, came out 3 years later, which was slightly larger and more like robust in length than the first book. And that goes up to the point where I think Daenerys Targaryen, when I say Daenerys Targaryen, she escapes Karth. And then the third book came out in the year 2000, which was roughly a year later. But the funny thing is A Storm of Swords, up until the fifth book came out, that was the largest of the three, and it came out a year after. And
so he must have really been either on a hot streak or like had to cut his story and knew he was going to put more into the next book.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, first of all, this is making me jump back to I had a college roommate who was so dedicated she was not going to watch the series. She wasn't going to watch any part of the series that she hadn't already read the book for. And so it was a little tenuous when we tried to get together as friends and all of our little gaggle wanted to talk about the series because she was like, I am waiting. Like, and of course now I think she's broken that rule because obviously the television series in some ways has surpassed and given a complete ending to the television version of the series, as opposed to the books. But
outline of an ending,
yeah, you know, I love the joke that it's like, oh, it's so nice of George to beta test his ending on all of us so he can fix it before it actually comes out.
Yeah, he's famously said too. Some people say stubbornly so. Like he is sticking to the ending that he has set for the show, for the books. Like what you see in the show is by and large what we're probably going to get at the end of the books if he ever writes them. Gosh, I hope he does. But yeah, that's how he works into that is the big question on people's minds. The people that are still, following the series as strongly as they did before the show even ended, they want to know how he gets from point A to point B.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think it's good to have that dedication to stick with the ending that he has planned, but as we've alluded to, and for those maybe who aren't familiar, the book series is up to is it the fifth title?
The fifth book. Yeah.
And so currently the titles for the sixth and seventh novels have been announced. It's The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring.
Yeah.
But and there were chapters, I believe, teased for The Winds of Winter.
Yeah. He's been, I think, ever since 2015 or something roughly, he's been putting out like little either full chapters or just like these are rough draft chapters of ones from The Winds of Winter. And despite popular belief, he has not written a single word for A Dream of Spring. He's gone on record saying he hasn't written a thing for Dream of Spring.
Yeah, and he's not going to, like, the books are still being written.
Yeah.
And of course, new rumors pop up all the time where they're like, oh, he's getting closer, or oh, like he'll just never finish these. And
we are no closer to A Winds of Winter than the day the first episode of the show came out.
Yeah, and I think
that's crazy to think.
It is because also when you think, okay, yes, he's also working on the HBO prequel series, which we'll get to in a little bit, but all the supplemental materials that do come out, and there's so much, it almost feels like we've gotten all the side quests and now it's like, all right, are we going to finish the main quest in the game kind of going on, but I can't say that I don't absolutely love all the supplemental materials and extra stuff we've gotten. It's just a very interesting path that the franchise is taking.
Yeah, kind of going along with the video game analogy. We are in the middle of an MMORPG and we're waiting for the next expansion to come out.
We are. And everybody's just kind of milling around and going, okay, I've got my house words and I've got my identity in Westeros, but like where are we going
next? What comes next?
Yeah. That's crazy for me because so now that HBO has wrapped up its season and or the whole series with the 8th season, the shortest in length but had the longest episodes, met with, I'm sure you're well aware, very mixed reception.
A lot of vitriol.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because we talk about, especially with so many shows that are streaming these days, like the Marvel Netflix shows are so famous for like, oh, they're too bloated, 13-hour-long episodes, we don't need that. But D&D, as they are called, for the 8th season, we're like, we can do it in 6 episodes.
Yeah. That's David Benioff and D.B. Weiss.
Yes,
for listeners. Yeah,
and then they're off to a Star Wars trilogy next. So some people joke, maybe they just wanted to get done with Thrones and move on to their trilogy. But it is interesting because apparently the network did offer them a full 10 episodes for the season, but they said we can do it in 6.
I don't want to be cynical. I like a lot of people say that. I don't think that that's totally the case. I'm not one to say for sure. But you can definitely tell just with how people kind of reacted to the show that there was not much, I don't want to say heart or care put into it because at the end of the day, the entire cast and crew put everything they had. I think the best episode of season 8 was the documentary that came after the last episode that showed segments of the crew like working. It's amazing the amount of work that went into that show.
And then the news comes out that Emilia Clarke worked through 2 aneurysms. Like,
to get through
my goodness.
Yeah.
Like, And the fact that she came in and she was still fearing that, like, oh, am I going to lose my job? But we see none of that because we see we just see the brilliance of her character. And say what you will about the way the arc ended, that character is still so impactful. Yeah. And so the 73 episodes later, like, does knowing the ending change the journey we all went through to watch the series? I mean, I personally, even knowing how it ends, I would still watch the whole show over again. And I really want to now, knowing, because it is weird to see those characters and go, well, I know where you're going next, but also just being able to take that and put yourself back in the moment of just that, oh, the first time that Jaime and Cersei, we catch them in the act and they push Bran out the window, and then when we meet Brienne of Tarth, and just like all those moments, watching them build up to it is still, I think entirely worth the journey.
Yeah, for sure. I think too, talking about like you mentioned the word impact. I think another one of the impacts that the show had at large, at least within the fan base itself, I've noticed, is it was a popular opinion to kind of hate on some of the actors when fans kind of perceived a bad performance, or, it's all subjective. But with the last season, it's kind of taught people to be a lot more like forgiving. It's like, if not even forgiving, but it's like realizing like, hey, this isn't all the actors' fault. Like they're putting their heart and soul into this stuff. Like no matter how bad it is, like you gotta give them the benefit of the doubt.
And you know what? Yeah. I think
that's great. Yeah.
I think there's also a manner of respect, and it's the trust between an audience and the artists presenting their story. If they're gonna write a bad story, you just have to let it happen. And this, again, I do not believe this was a bad story, but if things are gonna play out and they're gonna make those choices, you can't have them sacrifice their own artistic integrity, because when you look behind and you say, well, all this other stuff was a part of that as well. I think it's interesting because, I mean, in this day and age, we're starting to see it a little bit more and more, but never before with the fervor of the Game of Thrones fans. The idea that fans think they could launch a petition to get the series remade. And I understand there's a sense of commitment. There's a sense of like we're
ownership almost.
Because we've spent so much time with the characters, but we are only entitled to so much as what we've received, and that is the story. I think, but it's fascinating because I believe one of the petitions is sitting at over 1 million, almost 2 million signatures. But like sometimes you just have to let the artwork stand, and so on the one hand, we've got a story that people are begging to have rewritten. And on the other hand, we've got books that people are begging to have written in the first place.
Yeah. I hope that petition at least teaches studios a lesson of the writing matters. Like the arcs and the importance and the circumstances, the stakes, that matters to people. Because, so you got to make sure it all works.
Yeah. But so we did mention briefly the documentary. I actually haven't had the chance to watch it because I kind of wanted to let Game of Thrones just mellow after I'd watched it, but there was a 2-hour documentary.
It was a 2-hour documentary. I've caught snippets of it, but it's pretty funny because one of the people that they follow is an extra who he's played what is it? He's played a bit part as a Northman army or a serviceman for the Northern Army, and among various other roles. And it just kind of goes through and talks, and he kind of talks about like, oh, he's such a big fan and blah, blah, blah. Like it shows him kind of putting forth effort and all this stuff. And he's in the online communities that I'm a part of, he's become a very big fan favorite because people always like spend each episode. It's like, where is this guy? It's a game
like
of
the Where's Waldo of Westeros
to find him. Yeah. And the fact that he got such a big prominent like role in this documentary, it's heartwarming watching that, because it's like, so fun. That is the clearest example of a person that is super into the source material, like everyone is, but this is a very specific example of somebody who's so into the source material and loves it so much and puts their heart into it, and you can respect the show for that much alone.
And it's a Herculean feat on the other side as well. The degree to which they kept the secrecy of the scripts and the sets, and the language translator was only given the lines he needed to translate, no context, no indication of who was speaking, and everyone poured everything they had into this. And my I think one of my personal favorite things of the whole series is the costume fabrication. Just the stories. Oh my gosh, when the close-ups come up of the wedding dresses and you're like, well, this dress actually tells the story in the embroidery because here's the wolf going up the arm, or like here's the deer antlers and the roses intertwining. And it's just like, oh my God, forget what we're listening to just from the actors. The story is everywhere in it, and it's just the world building is phenomenal.
Loras Tyrell's like armor, the rosebud filigree, like
the Tyrells are my favorite.
Yeah, they're so. I love Lady Elena's like all of her wardrobe. Got the black that she wears after the sept explodes. Like it's like it. You see so much of these characters through the clothes that they wear. Like you see like Dany's youthful vigor and like, you know, the empress to be, not empress, but it's like, you know, the person she will be in the clothes that she wears all throughout just even season 2 when she's in Karth with like that blue and the gold filament, and just it's like you see regality, you see youth, you see like it's so good how they managed to nail it. Like
and as you watch the credits roll and you hear whatever ominous theme they've chosen to play over the ending credits, just the sheer amount of makeup, costume, like keeping all the props in order, putting the sets together, just the CGI alone. I know there were jokes about like, quick, we got to slash the budget and take down the dragons and the wolf, but like just the sheer amount of things that like those weren't there, but they made us believe every second was there. And so this franchise has, it's so fascinating to see that it started with the books. The show quickly surpassed the books. The show is now finished. We're waiting for more books, and we're tracing a path around Westeros in the meantime with
all the supplemental material that comes with it, and it's so good.
Well, and you pointed out to me because I have the this is the World of Ice and Fire book.
Ice and Fire, yeah.
I have that one, but I haven't read the whole book of it. But in the finale, when Grey Worm says we're going to Noth. Do you want to explain?
Sure. So in the show, Missandei talks about how she was originally born on an island called Noth. And in the show, it's never really specifically said that Noth is the same Noth from the books and all that stuff. We can assume it's the same thing. But in the books, it's explained that the island of Noth is, I think I have it written down, y'all. It's the island of Noth is, it's an island, obviously, that's a little north of Braavos, and it's made up of people that have round, flat faces, dusky skin, large, soft amber eyes that are flecked with gold. They're peaceful people. They do not war with anyone, even when invaders come. Invaders constantly come. They try to enslave them, build forts, mark the territory as theirs. But almost always within a year, all of those invaders are mysteriously dead. And the reason being is because the island is populated by these butterflies that carry this horrific disease that the native Nathi people are completely immune to. And it's just kind of a funny throwaway line, because if in the show at least, because if you are familiar with any of the supplementary material, when Grey Worm says, "No, we're like," when he says to the Unsullied, "We're going to Noth," it's like, oh, you're going to die. Like,
because of poisonous butterflies.
Because of poisonous butterflies. And it's like, why would you do that? Like, it was a weird, strange choice.
But for those people who do put the time, because this book is like a history textbook, and
it is,
will admit I was never one for history class in school, but
it's not tough. I would say it reads at like a middle school level history book, but
it's so fantastical, and so there are those storytelling elements throughout the show and all these other places where you can get your Game of Thrones fix that reward you for putting in the time to really immerse yourself in the world, which I just think is the hallmark of any great fantasy series. Now, whether it remains to be seen how the books finish, but it's also, is that gonna be the end of the series? I highly doubt that when those books finish. I mean, objectively, they may or may not be because of where George R.R. Martin is in the point of writing. But just there's so much to do in this world, and it even speaks to the fact that HBO is like, we have enough faith that people love this world enough that we're going to do a prequel series. So I pulled some information about the prequel. It's in development right now, so there's not a whole ton of information.
I'm actually, truthfully, I have no no idea. I'm going in completely cold on this.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, there's not too many concrete details, but this is supposedly set thousands of years before Game of Thrones. And for those the TV series is Game of Thrones, but Game of Thrones is the first book in A Song of Ice and Fire. Yeah. But this is thousands of years before the television series. And they're going to trace Westeros and the associated continents from the golden age of heroes to the darkest hour. And they've said that we're going to learn the true origins of the White Walkers. We're going to learn some of the mysteries of the East, and we're going to meet some of the legendary Starks who were way, way, way back then.
Okay.
And they have announced some casts. Naomi Watts is like the kind of premier role right now, and they haven't announced who she is, but she's a charismatic socialite with a dark secret. And then other stars include Miranda Richardson, Marquise Rodriguez, John Sim, Richard McCabe, Naomi Ackie, and more. There's a total of 16 stars that have been announced, and it's co-created and co-executive produced by Jane Goldman and George R.R. Martin. Goldman is the showrunner, and S.J. Clarkson is producing and directing the pilot. So, like, this is a serious contender, and I think they optioned a number of prequels, and some of them have kind of fallen off of development. They've admitted they're not doing all of them, but whatever this thousands of years before prequel is, it's interesting that they have teased that we'll learn more about the true origins of the White Walkers and stuff, because that does encourage fans to come back, even if they were slightly unsatisfied with some of the things that we did or did not get from the end of the series finale.
Right. Okay, so theory time.
Theory time.
They say thousands and thousands of years before the first Game of Thrones book see the origins of the White Walkers. I think this prequel series is going to deal with the very first Long Night that came about. And that so in a lot of the supplementary in a lot of the supplementary texts, they talk about the very first Long Night, and if memory serves me right, because it has something to do with a character known as the Bloodstone Emperor, who
he sounds like a fun person.
He is, yeah. It's there's so much to him. There's so much to Euron Greyjoy is it's hinted at that he's a little bit like in the same sort of character arc as this character, the Bloodstone Emperor. So the Bloodstone Emperor was a lot of the reason. God, I hope I'm not getting this wrong. He's a lot of the reason that the Long Night originally came to be. He either brought it about.
When you say Long Night, for people who are maybe not as intimately familiar with the like the lingo of,
it's when the White Walkers essentially take over, they cast all lands in eternal darkness, eternal extreme winter, and they can move about wherever they want to go. They don't have to deal with the sun potentially destroying them. They are just they rule everything, and the entire world is put like this.
Well, that sounds really plausible because the text on HBO's official website says it will be from the golden age of heroes to the darkest hour.
So we might be seeing the fall of the Empire of the Dawn, which I'm not familiar with in the slightest. It's either the fall of the Empire of the Dawn or the rise of the Bloodstone Emperor, which is the same thing, give or take about 5,000, 6,000 years between the two. It sounds like a long time, but it's like, it's I believe
in fantasy book years, that's like just the overturn of an era.
Yeah. And man, I'm trying to so the Long Night, it might have to do with the Long Night. If it's dealing with ancient Starks, that might mean that it is dealing with Starks that either landed in Westeros or the first men landing in Westeros. So it might be, and I believe it was Nymeria who led the first men to Westeros originally. So that would probably be showing their trek all through the lower portions of Dorne, upwards, northward, until they get to the point where the White Walkers kind of originate from the lands of always winter. So that's interesting. God, I hope they show like Sothorios. I hope they show more of that. I hope they show stuff that's east of even like Vaesthothrak and stuff that's like east of the Five Forts. Like there is so much that I want to see out of this show.
Well, and it does sound like they wouldn't do this lightly if they didn't believe that people would return for this type of storytelling, because it will not feature most characters we're familiar with. And I know everyone has their kind of ride or die houses, but right. We're going to see probably ancient versions of these characters that we then know and love. And I'm curious to see whether or not it will make their squabbles over the Iron Throne look small in comparison based on what has come before.
Yeah, maybe. I think it will be less of it will be almost like a game of empires, you could say, because in the world of Game of Thrones, in the ancient times, it was all empire based. There's the empire of Old Geese, which it's called Old Geese now, but it's the Giscari Empire. Ugh. There are the Valyrians. There's the Empire of Yt. There's the Empire of Langs. There's the Free Cities. I believe that before they were the Free Cities, it's the empires that made those up. It's everybody's kind of vying for control of Essos, and then at the same time, Westeros is discovered, and then it's like, oh, now we're into this new area, and suddenly, oh my God, there's children of the forest. There's these weird white trees with faces on them. Like, what is all this going on this side? And like in the west part of the world, all that's happening, and then in Essos, it's like everybody's vying for control, and it's very much like it's a Game of Thrones on a bigger stage.
Oh my goodness! So yeah, I mean that it's exciting to know that George R.R. Martin is still involved in this, and so I know while some people are like, just finish the books, I would almost rather, if for some reason the television series was the only concrete ending we get for a while, the chance to play around in a world this big with so many characters and things that, like, because even by necessity, parts of the show don't match the books because either some seasons were like put into the show concurrently so you could see all the action, or characters were changed, plot points were changed just for the necessity of the show. But there is places to breathe, and more room to explore, and every experience is a little different because of the way that things change for each version of the media. One of my favorite stories that, unfortunately, though I enjoyed it deeply, you get the sense that it has no impact on the franchise, is the Telltale games. There was a sequel in development until Telltale got closed down, unfortunately. Yeah. But there were 6 episodes. Mm-hmm. And I love the format of the Telltale games because you really do feel immersed. But at some point you realize, because you're playing as like a kind of a Stark retainer house called House Forrester, and you watch the movers and shakers. Like at some point, the Forrester daughter goes to King's Landing while Marjorie is queen, or if not queen, just about to become queen. Right. And so you see all the movers and shakers from the show, and you're like, wow, like I can.
I'm in this world.
Yeah, I'm in this world, and I can make some impact. And then you get to certain strokes, and you're like, well, oh no, unfortunately, some of the things that I do will not matter because this person always has to die. And and unfortunately, like even the first episode, there's a devastating like Ramsay Bolton shows up, and no matter what choice you make, he kills somebody. And so you're like, okay, so it speaks also to that feeling of inevitable brutality that the franchise has. But I mean, the Telltale game is worth it if you really just want to feel like you're making choices, because it's hard and you get invested and you go, oh crap, like I wouldn't survive in this world, because everybody loves to imagine where they would be in the fantasy world. Absolutely.
That's why I love these books. Like there's so much imaginative thinking that's presented to you. And the Telltale games right now they're one of the only like vistas you can kind of go into that's like RPG related, where you're in that world. I hope that they attempt to try it again with like something that's even bigger. I mean, like the sky's the limit with this series for sure. Really? It's like it's as in-depth as, if not more in-depth than other series like World of Warcraft and all that stuff. There's so much potential for it. Like it'd be so fun too.
And I think on the flip side of fans holding out for that conclusion, that hopefully it'll be interesting to see how people feel about the conclusion of the books now that they know how the show is going, like whether or not I'm sure people are still excited for the book's conclusion. But there is also a sort of freedom in knowing that story is not definitively done, because it still welcomes people to the fold, because it's like, hey, you can catch up on the books and you can watch the whole television series, but you still don't know how it's going to end. So you have a freedom and a time to join. And also for the immersion factor, they're turning one of the former studios for the show into an interactive and immersive tour, exhibits, props on display, costumes, technical breakdowns of how they achieved some of the effects on the show. And I think that's just really cool and special.
Cool. It's like a museum or something. Right.
Yeah. Oh. And it's one of the former studios for the show in I wrote this down. It's in Northern Ireland at Linen Mill Studios. That's going to open in 2020. So it's clear that though winter has come and gone in one facet, there is so much more to be done in this world. And now I really want to go back through World of Ice and Fire and really fully finish that and see some of the impacts that I might not have realized that are going on in that world.
It's really cool too, because it's like there's so much you can infer. Like I've probably said this a million times so far, but it's like there is so much you can infer from like a lot of the text that's presented to you that's outside of the main books. Like you discover like, oh, within the world of Game of Thrones, there's almost like a Lovecraftian like essence or something that's just constantly present. Like there are more evil, like malevolent gods than just R'hllor and the Great Other. There is obviously the Drowned God. There's the many-faced gods that the House of Black and White worships. But then there are these other ones in eastern parts of Essos and Sothorios that I brought up earlier that are just like the people that worship them, they practice like ritual sacrifice, blood worship, blood magic, like all of this stuff. And it's stuff that the show never really touches on, but the book does. And then it's all interrelated in a certain way, and it makes sense contextually because through those places you realize like, oh, this empire was built off of the base of that. But then 1,000 years down the line, it crumbled and it created what we see now, which is like places like Karth or, the Thousand Islands or Ashai or something like that. And it's all just like interwoven, everything's related, and you can discover so much. It's so cool.
Yeah. And I just, oh my goodness, I lost my train of thought here, but it is just fascinating watching this whole world unfold, and just, I definitely lost the thing I was going to say, but it comes down to that ultimately, that it's just, we have so much room to play. And I think I know what I was going to say. It walks that line of, and the supplemental materials obviously do dig into that more, and I'm fascinated to hear about the Lovecraftian element. It walks that line of not being, it is a fantasy series, but it's not and I mean no disrespect, but it's not the beat you over the brow with fantasticalness that some of Tolkien can be, because there's so much with and every good fantasy worth their salt has their own language and crazy races and these mysterious monsters, but especially the way the television series was presented, it wasn't like this is elves and magic and stuff, but the ways in which that works is more subtle. The resuscitation of petrified dragon eggs and the shadow assassin that Melisandre sent after Renly Baratheon, and it's just like, but so I think it was fun in the way that we do accept that there are fantastical things that can happen in this world, but it is not overwhelming magic and people have swords or wands and stuff like that.
Yes, that's the coolest thing too about Game of Thrones is there's always this ever-present idea that magic in this world, it's scarce, it's sparse, and when you perform it, it comes at a cost.
Super costly.
Yes, whether personal or otherwise. Like, I think I forget who it was. I think it was Miri Mazdur. She talks to Daenerys when Daenerys is trying to resuscitate Drogo from like this stupor that he's in. She's like, only blood or only a life can pay for a life, or something akin to that. Blood can pay for blood. And that's Game of Thrones is one of the few series that puts that big constriction on magic. With a lot of other fantasy series, it's like, oh, I can do magic willy-nilly. There's really like, I'm just able to do it and whenever I want. But
yes, there's always consequences to magic in forms, but when it is the like exact cause and effect or that kind of that monkey's paw of the
eye for an eye.
Of the fantasticism.
Yeah. And it put with that constriction, all these characters that practice magic, I kind of lost the point I was trying to make. It's overall, like, the interesting thing about Game of Thrones is that it limits itself. It's a fantasy novel for sure, but it takes a lot of the tropes that are taken for granted and it applies constrictions to those.
Yeah.
And it still manages to work even with those constrictions in some ways even better than a lot of other stories can.
Yeah, and having rules on your magic system is almost quintessential, and there's so many ways that people are redefining because we've hit the upper limits of magic and to a point where in fiction we can say magic can literally do anything, like, but then we rein it back and then we get the magic is like science, and then it's people come up with their own rules for the worlds of magic. And I think it is very smart, especially in a series that has so much history and the political struggle. Like, I think more than most other franchises, this one is really the political empire struggle, the who's going to sit on the throne kind of deal. So to limit the magic system and make it not seem like the ultimate cop-out, but when it is used, you need to pay attention because it's going to be costly.
Yeah, there is a great demand for it.
Yeah.
And yeah, for sure.
All I can say is that I think this franchise is still going to have its day in the sun. I think right now we're kind of not going into a long night. We're going into maybe like a tired night that people want a little bit of a break.
A warm morning.
Yeah, a warm morning. But there is still so much to be explored in this franchise, and it's not going away anytime soon. So if you know, it's also given people a chance to bow out. That it was like, hey, if you didn't like where this was going, then you can gracefully depart from here. We did put so many years into the series, but I think as fans, this world especially is about the journey, and getting answers, but not getting everything answered, because like it was mentioned for A World of Ice and Fire, not all of the world has been discovered yet, even by the writer, which I think is fantastic. So if you were going to recommend anything for people to check out regarding Game of Thrones, I mean, the obvious is watch the television series. It is very much worth it.
Yeah, I would say, give the television show a shot if you want to. If you really want to give the books a shot, I wouldn't start with any of the supplementary material at first. I would kind of get through the series first. But even before you get through the series, what I would start with is the prologue chapter from the very first book. That is the one where you follow 3 Rangers of the Night's Watch north of the Wall. You're in a universe that these characters don't understand, that you absolutely do not understand whatsoever. They're encountering a force, the White Walkers, that they have no idea what they're capable of. And it's beautifully written. It sets the stage. It sets the tone for everything. If you can get past if you can read the first prologue chapter and think to yourself like, man, I want to learn more about this. Again, sky's the limit. It is all open to you. It's so great.
And then, of course, fans can keep their eyes turned forward for the prequel series on HBO. There's no real expected date right now, but of course, if you really get that sense of longing, you can rewatch the television series and then hold on until 2020 for when they open the studio tour, if you're able to drop some gold coin and head over to Northern Ireland to check out the studio, because it is such an amazing world that you want to immerse yourself in, and there's countless ways to do that. However long it lasts, winter is still here, and after that, the spring. Although a dream of spring seems like nothing but a distant thought at the moment, there is no denying that the world of A Song of Ice and Fire has drawn fans in and captured the popular imagination. From fan theories about how it should have ended to the popularization of baby names like Khaleesi and Arya, we've all played the Game of Thrones in one way or another. And by the looks of it, the game isn't over just yet. Thank you for joining us. This has been Game of Thrones Then and Now. Do you enjoy listening to Then and Now? We are proud to bring you pop culture content completely ad-free, but that doesn't mean we don't need your support to help keep us going. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting platform and help spread the word about our podcast. We welcome fan feedback. Email us at podcasts@sideshow.com with your thoughts and suggestions for how we can make our shows even better. Plus, tune in for our full network of pop culture podcasts. See if your fan favorites make the cut in the Geek Culture Countdown, a bi-weekly podcast featuring pop culture top 10 lists. Hear exclusive interviews with celebrities and pop culture industry leaders as they let their geek side show in Look Who Showed Up. Join comedian Jeff May and his special guests as they discuss anything and everything in Sideshow's Sideshow. Then get all the latest pop culture news with our daily briefing, a 2-minute breakdown of the biggest geek headlines perfect for your Alexa or Google News briefings. We wouldn't exist without your continued support. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to let your geek side show.